Hello, I'm Jonathan Kraus, Multimedia Journalism Director for WHBY, and I'm joined today by our Engineer Emeritus, Steve Brown, longtime employee here for Woodward Community Media and WHBY. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here.
We're celebrating our 100th anniversary, and believe it or not, you were here for almost 50% of that. Give us some idea of how you came to WHBY in Woodward.
Well, I'd been in radio for about 2 or 3 years, working for other stations, and I had an opportunity to come to WHBY, top station in town. But of course, in those days, you started at the bottom of the heap, which was overnight weekends. I was a college student, so I figured I could make that work. Did cut into party time a little bit, but it was 11 p.m., I think, to 5 a.m. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. It was in the building at Law Street, down in the flats. So a lot of history in that building. That building was built in 1939, and I had a chance to actually decommission that building as an assistant engineer here. So it was really fun.
How did you transition then from on-air part-time guy to becoming an engineer?
I think what happened is I was working part-time in college, which was awesome. And then when I did graduate from college, they wanted to keep me around because we were planning to build a new building here on College Avenue that we're in today. And so the engineer and program director got together and they said, why don't we make this into a full-time job? You take 20 hours, I'll take 20 hours. And so that's how I really started here. I worked for the chief 20 hours a week, which became much more as we built this building.
Yep. Give us some idea what that transition was like, going from one building to another at that time period.
Well, that was actually really fun because I got a chance to play a pretty big part in that. Being on the engineering staff, we had to sort of figure out how to do it. So I actually ran both radio stations from one console in this building, which all the people said, how is he doing that? But we just patched that in so that we could work it out. And it just was a little bit of a chore to remember who I was on which station when we were doing that, but it was a neat experience.
I bet. And how long did that process take to get over here?
It really wasn't too bad. We moved over in phases. So first we brought over, I think, the sales department once we had the offices done, and then we brought over a lot of the support staff. So the air teams were the last ones to come over. And then I think we did basically WAPL one week and WHBY the next, probably.
This was the analog era, obviously. So how much more equipment did you have to set up than someone would now with a digital setup?
It's funny because in some ways I think it might have been less because you look at the pictures of those old control rooms and you had your console and 2 turntables and a reel-to-reel player. And I think at the time we were the wealthy station, so we had 2 triple-deck cart machines. And that was it. I mean, we didn't have a lot of the things that we count on today as being necessary.
Carts, by the way, for the kids are 8-track tapes.
They look like 8-tracks. They are a little different. But yes, it's basically a tape cartridge that holds one piece of audio. So you'd come staggering into the control room with 30 or 40 of these things so that you could get started. And then, of course, if you drop them in within earshot of the engineer, there was heck to pay.
I'm a little bit younger than you when it came to joining the broadcast, but back in the day, you actually had to be licensed to work.
That's correct.
In a radio station.
Yep.
What was that process like?
Well, the FCC had first class, second class, and third class licenses, depending on what job you aspired to in broadcasting or related fields. And so, yes, each operator had to have a third class radio telephone operator's permit or better. And so to get that, we ended up traveling to Chicago, and you'd go down and you'd write the test, and if you were successful, you were issued a permit. Came in the mail a few weeks later.
What was it like in this what was at the time a new building out here on East College Avenue? What was around compared to what we have out here now?
It's interesting you should ask that because yes, when they bought this land to develop this, it wasn't too much earlier than that. College Avenue didn't even go through to Kaukauna. I mean, so they just had punched that through. There was nothing else around here, no gas stations, no restaurants. We were basically in a big farm field, and we had to develop it, and the current radio road and warehouse road and all that was not even in existence.
So at the time, it was probably built out here because you could put up the big tower and it wasn't in danger of falling on anything.
Yes, correct. We were moving from the flats where we had a 200-foot tower, and because they knew the WAPL deal was coming in, they were building a 500-foot tower here to accommodate both antennas.
talking with Steve Brown. He's the engineer emeritus here for WHBY and Woodward Community Media. I want you to tell the story of your wedding day and how committed you were to the radio stations. Why did you have to come into work on your wedding day?
Well, my wife and I picked an April day because, of course, couldn't possibly be warm in April. I mean, I wouldn't sweat to death in my tuxedo, right? So, of course, wake up, it's 87 degrees. And perfect, nice, super humid, good Wisconsin weather. So yes, that's April 27th, 1984. That was the Appleton tornadoes. And it was interesting because I got to the church and about 3:45, the sirens went off. People from the station are starting to shift around in their chairs. No cell phones in those days.
Yep.
And so my wife at this time was driving over to the College Avenue Bridge with her bridesmaids watching the three tornadoes that you could see in the distance. And at about 4:01, when they were just about to start, all the pagers went off in the radio station or in the church, and the entire news department got up and left. It was humorous. The person that was carrying my pager that day got up and left. So yeah, and then my wife is still annoyed to this day that I was more interested in what happened going off to our honeymoon, and I was, can I get a newspaper? Trying to figure out what exactly happened in Appleton that day.
All right. You're touching on one of the most important things that we provide to the community, and that's kind of the safety information, those situations. And I imagine it's something that's very near and dear to your heart, especially making sure that we're complying with that kind of role that we need to do in the community.
One of the reasons I really loved working for WHBY is that, yes, it was providing an important community service. And I just felt it was part of the community, knitted in, as it were. And our news people would talk people through severe weather and do all kinds of things like that I really loved. And to be in the company of others that felt the same way really did feel like I belonged here.
How long in your career was it before you got your first computer to work with? Because they're everywhere now.
They were, and I remember the first one because it came in for the sales department, of course. But that would have been the mid 1980s, maybe the early 1980s. And yeah, it was two big floppy drives, and I don't even think it had a hard drive in it. But yes, if I would have had any idea. I remember going to some of our broadcast conventions where we would go to get trained, and we saw an early version of a audio on hard disk system. And of course, I remember sitting back and saying, that'll be a cold day in heck before I trust my entire radio station inventory on that spinning monstrosity. But I just didn't have the vision to see what would happen. 10 years later, it was already here. And 20 years later, it'd be hard to run the place without it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It must kind of eat at you, though, when you see a lot of competitors cutting people and shearing engineers and that kind of thing. What advice do you have for someone who wants to get into the backside of this industry?
Well, I think there's always room for good technical people in broadcasting. And if you have an interest, I'll tell you this, I was never bored a day in my life working in this industry. I briefly left the radio station because sometimes radio had, at that time particularly, had a reputation for not paying very well. And if you really wanted to make it, you'd go out and maybe work for the phone company or do something like that. But the truth is, I think that's changing now as the technology is becoming so important and we have a shortage of good technical people. In the old days, we talked about 1939 when they started. That building had room for probably 8 or 10 engineers and 8 or 10 announcers because that's the way it was. You had an engineer there every minute. Yeah. Things were just failing all the time. And it was a big profit business back then, and there were very few radio stations. Now there are so many radio stations, and some out there are trying to cut their way to prosperity, which is exactly the opposite of what really needs to be done. People follow programming. If you've got good community programming, even the commercials matter to people. If it's a good local business that's advertising, people want that information, yeah. And that's why we're here.
What would you say are some of your proudest moments over 50 years here at WHBY?
It's always neat for an engineer to do a big project. And I have two big ones that I'm really sort of proud of. In the 80s, we did a big project for WAPL, which upgraded the station a great deal. And then in 2003, we did a large project for WHBY. WHBY, when it was first started, was a 250-watt radio station. And over the years, when I joined in 1975, we were 1,000 watts a day, 250 watts at night. And it wasn't enough to transmit intelligible talk programming out to the airport, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
The community had grown past the radio station signal. So it was really an important thing for us to do the upgrade for WHBY, which came in a couple of steps, but ultimately meant a 25,000 watt radio station.
I should also mention you're a member of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame, based on not just what you did in terms of serving us here in this community, but what you also did within the radio engineering community itself. Give us some idea of what you were able to do beyond just working here in Appleton.
Well, I think one important thing was to try to start to plan for the next generation. We did train some really excellent engineers here, and they've gone on to have great careers in a lot of markets, big markets, but also just trying to put elements in place to train more engineers, to mentor them. I became active in the Society of Broadcast Engineers, which our company encouraged and supported. And that is a great organization that helps engineers teach each other. Because as the companies and industry has developed, most radio stations our size have one person or maybe two, and there may be multiple announcers that can help each other, but not as many engineers. And so these organizations like the Society of Broadcast Engineers give you an outlet where you can meet other people that do the same thing you do, that have the same frustrations you do. And often you can get great ideas from each other. And I was able to help form a chapter here in the Fox Valley. And then as time went on, I was also able to serve the state. Wisconsin Broadcasters Association has a committee that runs a statewide broadcast clinic every fall for training engineers. And then late in my career, I joined the National Board of Directors of SBE, they've got terrific programs for engineers in all markets.
Final question for you. I know you don't just work at WHBY, but you are also a WHBY listener. What does the station mean to you?
I thought about this question a little bit, actually, because just thinking over 50 years, the first time I ever heard my name on WHBY, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, when a car hit me outside my school. And I remember going home, and I was fine, unfortunately, but I went home and listened to the radio, and I heard, it couldn't have been Ray, because Ray wasn't here yet, but it was whichever newscaster was. And that was so important to me. And then, of course, the next big passage of time, rock music, right? 8 or 10 years old or whatever you were, and Jim Shador on Program X, 2 hours of rock music on the MOR station in town. But that's how a lot of us learned about it. And then, just listening over the years to all of the terrific teams and people we've had. In those days, it was, Bob Lloyd and Jim Fisher. And I'm going to miss so many names because it was a great team in the 60s here. And then in the 70s and 80s, Bob Somm, Mike Diamond, some of those. Eileen Eisenberg, a terrific talent on many levels. She and I worked together quite a lot. She learned the technology so that she could help us with some minor automation in the radio station. And she was just a terrific person, too. So many great people. And in the current team, too, people now, like yourself, that are making the memories for those 8 and 10-year-old kids.
I appreciate that. By the way, I see Steve here at the station like every Saturday and Sunday.
Well, I get teased a little bit by Jonathan, but that's because he's here on Saturday and Sunday.
The news never sleeps.
Okay, but and it's kind of the same with technology. If you're here during the week, it's great because you can help people. But a lot of times to get some clear focus time, it's nice to be here when no one else is here.
Steve, I appreciate the time and thanks for taking part in our 100th anniversary celebration.
Thank you, Jonathan.